Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Gendek, and I'm the manager of the NJDOT Bureau of Research. Thank you for joining us today for this Lunchtime Tech Talk. Today's event is one of a series sponsored by the Bureau of Research that includes webinars, lunchtime tech talks, and other events, such as our upcoming research showcase. These tech talks are meant to share and promote the implementation of research and innovative practices and the transfer of knowledge among NJDOT staff and others within the transportation industry. Today's tech talk is titled, What Happens Now? Virtual Public Engagement During and Beyond COVID-19. And it will feature several speakers from within and outside New Jersey who will discuss their experiences navigating the challenges and working with the tools of virtual public involvement during the pandemic. Our speakers today are public involvement practitioners from the FHWA, NJDOT, DVRPC, and one of New Jersey's MPOs, and the North Carolina DOT. Today's event will be actively moderated by Andrea Lubin and Trish Sanchez from Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers University. Both were instrumental in organizing today's webinar, so thank you to them. Andrea and Trish are public involvement researchers and practitioners from the Public Outreach and Engagement Team, or POET, at Rutgers VTC. They're also part of the team for a new research study, NCHRP 08-142, Vpi, a manual for effective, equitable, and efficient transportation agencies, and that is currently underway. We'll hear more about that study today during this webinar. So now I'll hand it over to Trish and Andrea. Thank you for attending, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the panelists' presentations and participate afterwards during the moderated Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, though, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. This is just some to keep in mind before the webinar. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. All the questions will be submitted to the host, so feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them during Q&A after the presentation. All the questions will be directed to the speakers or the host. Also, the presentations will be posted on the NJDOT Tech Transfer website, as well as the recording, and so we'll let you know when that is posted. Professional development credits or AICP maintenance credits are also available. So if you remain, and we hope you remain for the full session today, please let us know your full name so that we can get you in the registration, so that we can get your certificate. Also, there'll be a feedback form that's going to pop up at the end of our webinar, so please fill that out. Let us know what you think. Give us some thoughts on any additional tech talks you would like to hear. And then we hope to aim up by 1:30. So if you have any technical difficulties, you can send us an email, or again, you can send us a chat at the bottom of our screen if you're having any issues with viewing or sending us questions. Okay, so now we'll get into the meat of it. Thanks again, Amanda, for introducing our tech talk today. My name is Trish Sanchez, and I'm a public relations and outreach specialist at the Allen M. Voorhees Transportation Center, or VTC, at the Blasting School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers. So today I'll be facilitating our session along with my colleague Andrea Lubin, who is a senior researcher at VTC. So here's our planned agenda for today's Tech Talk. Andrea and I will be giving just a brief overview of the session and share some of our experiences with VPI over the past year and a half. And then we'll hear from our 5 fabulous panelists who will introduce shortly, and each will present for about 15 minutes. And then following all of their presentations, we'll open it up for Q&A for the last 15 minutes of the webinar. So please stick around. As you're aware, today we're focusing on virtual public involvement, or VPI, both during and before, both before and during and beyond the pandemic. So we know a lot of you are working at DOTs and MPOs and other local public agencies, and you had to rapidly adapt to virtual platforms due to COVID. So, and engaging with public for transportation plans and projects and other activities. So VPI has flourished during the pandemic, of course, out of necessity, But also it's going to continue after the pandemic, and it offers benefits such as increased participation from the public, but there's also been some challenges with VPI, such as ensuring involvement from underserved communities or those who are not technology enabled. So we'll hear a little bit more about that from our panelists today. So they will share their experiences with you. Our panelists will all share their experiences with you engaging with the public virtually during the pandemic, as well as challenges and solutions. So, and we'll also learn about how to reach underserved communities using VPI. And then finally, our panelists will tell us their plans for using VPI in the future. So as I mentioned a moment ago, Andrea and I work at Rutgers VTC, and our center was established at Blaustein about over 20 years ago. And we conduct research that explores transportation linkages to other public policy areas and provide a forum for informed public discussion about transportation policy issues facing the state and the nation. And our primary activities focus on policy-oriented research, as well as training, education, and technical assistance. So these are just some of the areas of concentration that we focus on here at Rutgers VTC. VTC is also home to several signature programs and initiatives that you may be familiar with, including NTI, our National Transit Institute, our New Jersey Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center and Safe Routes Resource Center. But we also house the Public and Outreach Engagement Team, or POET, which my colleague Miriam Salerno and I launched the center in 2016, and Andrea is an integral member of our team. So we're a multidisciplinary group. We have expertise in planning and public policy, marketing, communication, outreach, public and stakeholder engagement. So through our work, we've had the opportunity to both do research and practice involving VPI. So we're going to share some of those thoughts with you. So as Amanda mentioned, POET has performed a study for the National Cooperative Highway Research Board, or NCHRP. We did a synthesis in 2019 about practices for online public involvement, and this was providing the current state of use for online public involvement tools used by state DOTs. So we conducted an online survey, we did some interviews with state DOTs, and some of our key findings showed that online involvement allowed for efficiencies in communication and outreach. Website, blogs, and social media were the most common tools used. And online involvement supplements in person, but it wasn't a standalone practice at the time. And some of the challenges included digital divide, access to the internet, and staff who were familiar with online involvement tools. So obviously that landscape has changed significantly in the last 2 to 3 years. And so Rutgers POET is also currently underway with a follow-up study with NCHRP. So we just kicked off this NCHRP study about VPI, where we're tasked with creating a manual for effective, equitable, and efficient practices for transportation agencies. So this study is going to commence over 30 months. It'll include 2 phases. The first phase will cover research and guidance with state DOTs and their practices during COVID. And then phase 2 will involve creating the manual based on our phase 1 work, as well as additional data that we collect from practitioners, from experts beyond transportation, and the public. So keep an eye out for that, because we may be reaching out to some of you as part of our research. But that's a very exciting project that we're working on. So some of the practice that we've done in the past 18 months, we did a multilingual outreach study for SJTPO, or South Jersey Transportation Planning Organization. They're our Southern Region New Jersey MPO. And that involved researching and developing recommendations for enhancing and sustaining engagement to underserved populations. And we assisted them with implementing virtual outreach as a result of the pandemic. We also worked with Somerset County in New Jersey on their communication and outreach assessment, which also pivoted from traditional to virtual outreach. And then we're currently working with Middlesex County here in New Jersey on Destination 2040, which is their strategic plan update. And so we're implementing stakeholder and public engagement to gather input on the plan throughout the planning process. So we've had to pivot to VPI as well. So some just quick key takeaways from these practices. There is no one size fits all, especially because each community is different. So it's important to experiment, try different engagement practices. We also noted that it's important that participants feel welcome, especially in the virtual world, and make sure there's a benefit for them to participating. Ensure that they're not just part of the decision-making process, but they're actually, or they are part of the process, but they're not just approving something that's already been decided. It's also important to continue to build local partnerships and trust and work with your community organizations and local libraries. We partnered with local libraries to offer access to the internet and computers. So if they couldn't participate in VPI, they could. And then social media and videos are very effective means of outreach and communication. And so be sure to account for multiple languages so that everyone can participate. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, who's going to talk a little bit more about our VPI projects. So I'll turn it over to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Trish. Welcome, everyone. I'm a senior researcher at the Voorhees Transportation Center, as Trish mentioned, and much of my work is focused on exploring transportation needs and issues of transportation disadvantaged populations, including people with disabilities and older adults. Since the onset of COVID-19, any project that I have been leading or contributing to has pivoted most, if not all, of our engagement to virtual. One of those projects was for the Kessler Foundation that I undertook with the Rutgers Center for Advanced Infrastructure and Transportation, also known as CATE. For those of you not familiar with the Kessler Foundation, they are a New Jersey-based nonprofit that supports rehabilitation and disability employment research. Our work for Kessler this past year involved a series of virtual group listening sessions with adults with disability who were seeking to access employment and other essential trips during the pandemic. We encountered difficulty in recruiting for these virtual listening sessions when we tried to do so using our contacts within the New Jersey disability stakeholder community. However, we ultimately and happily achieved success when we conducted our session immediately before or following existing online programs that were being implemented weekly by several centers for independent living operating here in the state. Which really drove home the benefit to us of organizing your VPI to meet people where they are. Next slide, please, Trish. One topic that some of our panelists today are going to discuss is efforts that they've taken to support involvement of underserved populations in their VPI work. On that note, I'd like to just share a few quick findings from a series of online interviews conducted by myself and other colleagues at the Voorhees Center in summer 2020 that we undertook for the MPO that serves Northern New Jersey, which is the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. Our goal was to gather information from social service agencies and community organizations who support vulnerable populations, including people with disabilities, older adults, homeless veterans, and LEP populations, on challenges and successes in virtually engaging with the folks that they support. Key takeaways from our discussions with these 19 organizations included, as you can see on the slide, the benefits of limiting group size for VPI when working with populations that may need support during the event, the need to offer technical assistance, often one-on-one, to help increase their successful participation, and the importance of not limiting virtual engagement opportunities to web-based, but instead always offering low-tech and no-tech options for engagement as well, such as phone or mail. I want to point out that what really remains with me from these interviews was that despite challenges, feedback was extremely supportive overall regarding the benefits of virtual engagement as shared by these diverse community agencies. Most emphasize that virtual engagement has provided a means for vulnerable populations to stay connected during the pandemic and has also expanded engagement opportunities in many instances to those who had previously been unable to participate in person due to obstacles including transportation issues and childcare. Next slide, please. So now onto our panelists for today. You will hear from 5 professionals who are increasingly connected to virtual public involvement in their professional work in transportation for public sector agencies. As Trish mentioned, please feel free to submit your questions as you listen to each panelist. But as a reminder, we're going to direct the questions we receive to panelists immediately following all of the presentations. So I am now going to turn it over to our first panelist, Ricky Clark, who is a transportation specialist with FHWA. Prior to joining FHWA, Ricky has had over 20 years of state DOT experience serving in a variety of capacities and program areas, including long-range transportation planning, project development in NEPA, statewide public involvement, project management, and district maintenance operations. Ricky's experiences with VPI largely involve past DOT work in which he oversaw the development of statewide public involvement procedures, participating in EDC 5 as the state accepted the VPI innovation, successfully securing STIC incentive grant funding to advance the agency's public involvement program. Ricky, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Andrea, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. And I'd like to thank the session for allowing me the opportunity to spend this time with everyone as we talk about virtual public involvement, the exciting innovation that allows transportation representatives and officials and decision makers to more effectively and efficiently engage with our various stakeholder groups. And so at this time, I'm going to begin to share a screen. And so this is always the most exciting part of a presentation like this. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share this and see if we are sharing here. And let me make sure I share my screen and not anything else. Let's share screen. All right. Can anyone tell me if my screen is being shared?
Looks good.
Okay, so let's go back here. All right, so as I was mentioning, so it's an exciting time to certainly talk about virtual public involvement. And so thank you for the introduction again, Andrea. And as Andrea mentioned, my name is Ricky Clark, and I work in the Federal Highways New Jersey Division Office as a transportation specialist under the division's planning and program development team. I've been with the division for just a little more than a year now, having onboarded with Federal Highways during the COVID-19 pandemic of last year, continuing pandemic, and I've been teleworking from Indiana the past year. I worked for the DOT, as Andrea mentioned, for 20 plus years. My current role, though, with the division office is I oversee several program areas, including asset management, freight, transportation performance measures. And so again, really excited to have an opportunity to talk with you today about virtual public involvement. Actually, let me go back one more. All right, so some of the things in terms of the presentation, I'd like to spend some time kind of talking about the foundations of public involvement, because certainly when you speak on virtual public involvement, I think it's important to take a step back to talk about the foundations of public involvement. So we'll spend some time with that. Federal Highways issued some temporary virtual public involvement guidance that I think will be really important in setting the foundation for some of the presentations that you'll hear later this afternoon. I'll also spend some time talking about the introduction to EDC 6, Everyday Counts, round 6, and then Vpi Tools and experiences with Vpi as well. So when you think about virtual public involvement, you first have to think about public involvement as the foundation. Transportation agencies must involve the public and stakeholders throughout the transportation process, including the development of transportation plans, programs, projects. It's really important to note that early and continuous public participation is required through several statutes, pieces of legislation, regulations, executive orders. I've listed several important pieces of legislation and regulations on this slide. I'll touch on first the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, landmark legislation prohibiting the discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin in programs and activities that receive federal assistance. The National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, requiring federal agencies to assess environmental effects of the proposed actions prior to decision making. The next several bullet points kind of pertain to planning regulations, both for MPOs and then also for statewide and then non-MPO transportation planning. There's another regulation there that speaks to requirements for states to have public involvement processes in place, another requirement for MPOs to have public participation plans in place. The very last bullet point is an executive order that speaks to federal actions to address environmental justice, EJ, and minority populations and low-income populations. So these are really the foundations of public involvement and certainly should be the foundations of BPI and moving forward. State DOTs, MPOs, local public agencies are tasked with the task, I should say, of ensuring that decisions are made in consideration of and to benefit public needs and preferences. Public participation and involvement brings diverse viewpoints and values into the decision making process. Furthermore, public engagement during transportation planning development also helps agencies identify issues and concerns early in the process, which is a really key point, because if you can identify those issues and concerns early, then you can actually lead to ultimately accelerating the delivery of the project, which is really a key point. Virtual public involvement strategies supplement traditional face-to-face information sharing with technology platforms that increase the number and variety of methods agencies use to inform the public, to receive feedback, and also to collect and consider public comments. So the next slide I want to touch on is just the temporary virtual public involvement guidance that Federal Highways issued. So the FHWA issued temporary virtual public involvement during the COVID-19 pandemic guidance to address the unusual and extraordinary circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. I apologize, there's probably a train in the background. I live very close to a train line. But yeah, so Federal Highways issued this temporary virtual public involvement guidance really to really speak to the pandemic, including steps taken by public health officials concerning closures of public meeting venues, also social distancing and other steps. So these steps really affect FHWA recipients and sub-recipients. They affect the ability to provide an in-person setting where decision makers and members of the public are physically present in the same location. So in response to the various measures taken by public health authorities in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including the closure of meeting venues, social distancing, Federal Highways is temporarily or has temporarily permitted all public involvement activities previously conducted in person to exclusively use virtual technologies and techniques to fulfill the essential purposes of the in-person involvement. So an important item to also keep in mind is that consistent with applicable state, local, and tribal requirements, continued in-person involvement should be allowed in cases where a suitable physical location is available, and the state has determined that such meetings can safely be conducted. The last point regarding this slide, so Federal Highways has temporarily issued this VPI guidance, and it will remain in effect until there's been a declaration that the COVID-19 pandemic has ended. So this is the guidance regarding virtual public involvement. Kind of the keyword right there on the slide would be the temporary virtual public involvement. So at such a time that when the COVID-19 pandemic has been declared as ended, then certainly Federal Highways will issue additional guidance at that time. And so we'll move to the next slide here. So let's kind of get into and transition into Everyday Counts, EDC. So Everyday Counts is an initiative of the Federal Highway Administration designed to identify and deploy innovation aimed at reducing the time it takes to deliver highway projects, enhances safety. It also protects the environment. FHWA, we are in our 6th round of Everyday Counts, which began back in 2011. Each round of EDC features a number of innovations. EDC 6 features the innovations shown on the slide. New Jersey has accepted all EDC 6 innovations, which is really, really exciting, including virtual public involvement. NJDOT and New Jersey MPOs regularly utilize a number of VPI innovations, including do-it-yourself videos for agency social media feeds and soliciting input, and also raising public awareness of various programs, utilizing project visualization to allow the public to view proposed improvements far beyond what could ever be shown on a typical design plan sheet. In addition, virtual public meetings, virtual public information centers are utilized here in New Jersey to solicit public input for transportation plans, studies, project development activities. And so a really exciting time as many of the VPI innovations are being utilized here in New Jersey. Just a quick mention regarding Vpi Tools. FHWA, through the Everyday Counts VPI innovation, includes a variety of tools. These tools are intended to assist project sponsors in developing a public involvement plan that is customized to fit the needs of the public, in addition to the needs of stakeholders impacted by a proposed project and/or action. So a key point, and I believe Andrea made this point as well. So VPI tools are not intended to be one size fits all, but rather VPI tools can be used and should be used depending on the project's size, perhaps the scope of the project, the impact or level of impact associated with the project, or also project complexity. So it's not a one size fits all approach. It's like utilizing tools for any type of assignment. Different tools for the job are needed. Virtual public involvement techniques provide state DOTs, transit agencies, MPOs, rural transportation planning organizations, with a platform to inform the public and to receive feedback. These strategies increase the number and variety of channels available to agencies for remotely disseminating information to the public, and also create efficiencies in how public input is collected, how public input is considered, which potentially can accelerate planning and project development processes. And so we see on the screen the different types of VPI tools that can be utilized, and so certainly an exciting time as you've got some flexibility depending on the scope, complexity, and size of the project. You can use the appropriate VPI tool. So moving to next slide, I've got two more slides here. I know we're running a little short on time. So VPI extends our reach to the public, right? Which is a great thing, absolutely. But more importantly, VPI enables the public to directly engage transportation officials. So through the VPI innovation, state DOTs, MPOs, transportation agencies tasked with decision-making responsibilities are no longer bound by the traditional parameters of public involvement. In fact, VPI enhances our ability as transportation decision makers to reach our respective constituencies more effectively and more efficiently than ever before. And so on my last slide, there is one really important point, and Andrea also touched on this as well. And so while the VPI innovation is super exciting, extends our reach, allows the public to engage with us directly, it's really important to note that while VPI enhances public outreach and engagement, VPI isn't all-inclusive, meaning that not everyone, may be hard for some of us to believe, but not everyone has access to the internet, or may have limited access or even the devices necessary for online participation, whether it be computers, laptop, smartphone, or particularly if you've got populations that are living in perhaps rural areas where broadband internet availability and connectivity can be a challenge. So in conjunction with utilizing Vpi tools, it's really important for project sponsors to consider and to make sure that they provide alternative participation options for individuals with limited or no internet access. Additionally, project sponsors must provide full, fair, meaningful opportunities for participation, including participation by minority and low-income populations. Measures should also be implemented to ensure accommodations are provided to non-English speakers and also participants with disabilities. And so with that as my last slide, I'm really excited to kind of hear the presentations from the other panelists. And again, thank you to Rutgers for the opportunity to participate, and look forward to participating during the panel discussion later to come this afternoon. So thank you everyone for your attention. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Ricky. Ricky and I are actually both facilitators for the EDC 6 Innovation on BPI, and we overwhelmingly heard from our participants that they're interested in webinars and tech talks about BPI. So we're actually listening to you. So we're here for you today. And also, we thought we should have a keeping it real, because both Ricky and I actually had problems sharing our screen. So, this happens with BPI. All right, on to our next speaker, Jameel Robbins. Jameel is a public involvement, community studies, and visualization group leader in the environmental analysis unit at the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Jameel coordinates and supervises public outreach efforts through the department, and his job duties also include overseeing the review and approval of all community impact assessments and indirect and cumulative effect reports, which are used in the preparation of environmental documents and during project permitting. Jameel is a member of the Transportation Research Board's Committee on Public Engagement and Communications, and he currently serves on the core team for FHWA's Everyday Counts 6 BPI initiative. So I'm going to turn it over to Jameel.
Thank you, Trish. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Almost. Yes.
Can. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. The topic of my presentation is how to reach underserved communities with virtual public involvement. In full disclosure, I gave a presentation on this topic for Federal Highway Administration about 6 months ago. In that time, not much has changed with our approaches. So if you attended that webinar, hopefully there was some information you missed that you pick up on this time and that you find this presentation useful. So with that said, as Trish said in the introduction, with the pandemic, we all had to suspend traditional face-to-face public meetings and pivot to a 100% virtual landscape. And in lieu of face-to-face meetings, we initially introduced 3 alternatives for our project teams to use. And I'll cover that throughout the presentation. But the important thing to note is that these alternatives can be utilized together. And in some cases, we've used them all on a specific project. Now, we can't talk about winning outreach efforts or strategies without awareness. So the importance of marketing is fundamental to that end. Establishing thoughtful marketing and advertising strategies is essential to the success of all of our engagement efforts. The primary purpose of marketing is to educate and inform a customer. In our case, it's residents or the community. Informing communities about our various project plans, studies, or actions equals transparency. And by increasing transparency, it helps to build trust. And that's very important this day in this time when I believe public trust in government may be at an all-time low. And there's a lot of anti-government sentiment. So it's important that we be seen as responsible members of our communities. By increasing awareness, we increase engagement, therefore participation, ensuring that our outreach efforts are more equitable and inclusive. Now, the number one advertising tool by far these days with respect to cost and reach is social media. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but as of this year, according to Pew Research, 72% of the US population are active social media users, compared to just 5% 16 years ago back in 2005. This is a tremendous increase there. But let's take a little bit deeper dive and look at social media usage by demographics. And we'll start with race. 69% of white Americans use social media, with 77% of African Americans being social media users and Hispanics being 80% users. And when we talk about areas and we think about underserved areas, we typically think about rural areas. According to Pew Research, roughly 66% of those in areas considered rural are using social media. When we look at income, those making less than $30,000 a year, 69%. Those in the range between $30,000 to $50,000 a year, 76%. When we look at education, those with a high school diploma or less, 64%. And those are some really promising numbers, and those numbers continue to grow as you see. But I can't talk about social media without talking about Nextdoor. And Nextdoor has really been a great addition to our toolkit. We've been using it for about 2 years now, and in those 2 years, we've had 222 posts with 11.5 million impressions and well over 20,000 engagements. And for those of you that don't know the difference between impressions and engagements, basically impressions refer to the number of times your content is viewed. And so impressions are a great way to gauge awareness. Engagements refer to the number of interactions people have had with your content. So that would include likes, comments, retweets, etc. What I have on the screen is an example of, it was a statewide trail, Great Trail State outreach effort. And our, we have 100 counties in North Carolina, and so they're kind of split up. They're halved when we do statewide initiatives. And so for this, you'll see this included 62 counties, and we had almost 300,000 impressions on this survey. So this was the survey ad. So that was extremely important. So again, we're getting the word out. People are able to participate if they want. Of course, you have your traditional media, your web pages, and of course we all, I believe Trish or Andrea touched on it earlier, but we all should be leveraging our partner agency and organization networks. And then of course we have radio and television. When I talk about radio, pulled some stats from newsgeneration.com and Pew Research, and they say that 98% of African Americans and 99% of Hispanic Americans are reached monthly by radio. Our drive time ads typically run during rush hour time, so from 6 to 10 in the morning and from 3 to 7 in the evening. And then when I talk about television, I'm mainly talking about local access television. However, we do have some contracts with a few stations across the state to run some very cost-effective television ads, but that would be for your, for your major projects. I'm not going to go through all of these, but other advertising methods that are extremely effective. But one thing, talking about newsletters and postcards, nothing new there, but when we combine that with VPI tools, such as our online engagement platforms, then it changes it up some. And so what we had to do, what we came up with for during the pandemic was some additional language to add to our newsletters and postcards. And this is an example of a big project out in the extreme western portion of the state. So, there's a lot of EJ as far as low income communities out there. And just due to topography, broadband access may be limited. So we still set up our virtual engagement platforms, but we added this note. And if you can't see it, I'll read it. Comments and questions may be submitted online, by email, or by calling that specific number. For those unable to access the virtual public hearing materials online, a copy of the presentation and meeting handout can be requested by calling the number shown above. And then we also added QR codes to make it easier. And the beauty of those project phone numbers, which is provided by publicinput.com, people with landlines can call in. Their comments or questions are automatically transcribed into our virtual database. And so we can not only catalog that, but we can also follow back up with them. This is just another simple example of a newsletter, but what I want to point out here is that we included the comment form in the newsletter for those that prefer to respond in more traditional ways. But on the back of it, we still have our virtual public involvement materials available, as well as more traditional project manager, project team contacts. Another tool we used throughout the pandemic were our project informational videos. By far the biggest hit throughout the and most effective tool throughout the pandemic. When basically we would prepare as we would for a normal public meeting. However, instead of setting up a public meeting, we create these PowerPoint videos. We have a template prepared, and then we do a voiceover explaining all of those materials, and then we post it online. And they typically run 3 to 5 minutes. Sometimes they may run to 7 minutes, but we try to keep them as short as possible. But when people are interested in the project, they will watch it. The particular example I have on the screen is from a generic video. We created several generic videos of, common of tools or processes that are common to pretty much all public meetings, and that helps shorten the project informational videos. And this is this particular example is one we created to teach people how to read the design public meeting maps. The they're basically two versions. So we have the voice over PowerPoint, which we fancy up some using some software called Camtasia. So we add animations and effects to those to make it a little more polished. But we also have the Steven Spielberg edition, which is created by our videographers in our communications office. And that's for your larger projects. This is an example, a screenshot from one of our I-95 widening projects. And of course, we have our two online engagement platforms that we use at NJDOT. That's MetroQuest and publicinput.com. I do want to be clear that we're not endorsing either platform. These are just platforms that we use. There are a lot of good platforms out there, and each agency or firm needs to figure out what works best for them. Here's an example, a GoToWebinar example from an EJ outreach effort for the Burton Street community as part of the I-26 Connector Project in Asheville, North Carolina. This meeting was specific to discussing sidewalks along Downing Street. The great thing about the live virtual meetings is that they're all recorded and placed on the web so that those unable to make or attend the live meeting can go back and watch and provide feedback at a time that's convenient for them. I also like to point out the importance or something that everyone should consider is the simulcasting or broadcasting. The example I have up here is from 2018 from the Complete 540 Design Public Hearing, which is a major project completing the outer loop around here in Raleigh. It is a 70-mile loop around the city. But we partnered with the city of Raleigh, and they sent their public access television folks out to record the hearing in its entirety, and then they aired that throughout the comment period, which was very helpful. The great thing about those partnerships is that a lot of municipalities are typically looking for content to air. So again, utilizing your partner agency and organization networks. And broadcasting, in addition to making participation more accessible, easier for the public, more people are apt to engage in the process. But we're also going to reach a broader demographic and beyond those few motivated, passionate individuals that we all know. Here's another example of broadcasting. This is images from the I-26 Connector Project that I mentioned earlier. Very watched project. There's a lot of interest in this project. And so we broadcast the public hearing via Facebook Live. So it's very, we had a packed house, but then we had well over 100 people watch online. Again, broadening participation through broadcasting. Visualizations. I'm a big proponent of project visualizations, whether it be 3D renderings, videos, interactive animations, because they provide us a way to immediately translate the appearance and location of designs and concepts with the purpose of promoting a better understanding of transportation projects and their associated impacts. Visualizations can explain a project to anyone, regardless of their background or prior knowledge. And these tools, just like the videos, can be easily dispersed across online channels, such as social media and websites. But some kind of wrapping up here, some things to consider when you're planning VPI and thinking about underserved populations, limited broadband access, mobile plan data costs, visual limitations when dealing with the elderly, download requirements, making sure that the tools you're using are easily accessible, the use of dial-in numbers, as I talked about earlier, and also the use of traditional methods of feedback. So in closing, I want to make sure that I emphasize the need or re-emphasize the need for thoughtful marketing strategies. I always say you can have the best mousetrap ever invented, but if no one knows about it, what good is it? So among the items I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, reiterating the importance of a comprehensive social media campaign. But that said, I want everyone to note that when conducting VPI activities, we cannot solely rely on social media and other electronic methods of advertising. Traditional advertising methods such as mailers, targeted stakeholder outreach, door hangers, bus ads, traditional media, etc., should continue to be used to reach underrepresented groups, as well as traditional methods of input. Also, the use of LARCs. I like to talk, that's an acronym that we have for when it comes to environmental justice, local area resource contacts. When it comes to LEP, it's language assistance resource contacts. And they basically mean the same thing. So local community leader, could be a pastor, a business owner, someone that can help rally the troops, set up meetings, help disseminate information for us, and help gather feedback from the community. Those are extremely helpful when dealing with underrepresented communities. And then smartphones. Smartphones are critical to the equation. All your tools, VPI tools, need to be mobile friendly. According to Pew Research, an increasing number of people in underserved communities are relying on their smartphones as their primary source of access to the internet. Smartphone ownership, as you can see here, among adults is at 85%. Home broadband subscriptions are at 77%. And that has increased since 2019 by almost, by roughly 4% in each category. And even though that's a modest increase, it's statistically significant. And it comes at a time when the majority of Americans say the internet has been important to them personally. But since going 100% virtual, we've seen our participation numbers increase. Overall, the recorded project informational videos have been the biggest hit because it allows us a chance to control our message like we've never been able to do so before, because the information from the horse's mouth is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the outreach period. Again, they can be easily shared with friends, families, neighbors, and they also allow us a chance to inform and commuters and capture feedback from them like never before, when geo-targeting and geofencing is a standard operating procedure for us now. And these videos are getting thousands of views, in some cases upwards of 10,000 views. And we all know that there are no traditional public meetings that have ever been able to inform that many individuals. So with that, give you a final takeaway. And I'll leave you with this one thought and tagline from our Everyday Counts 5 and now 6 virtual public involvement initiative, and that is a 21st century transportation system needs to be built on the foundation of a 21st century public involvement strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jameel. That was really informative. A lot of great ideas. Folks, thanks for adding some of your questions to the Q&A for Jameel and Ricky. And if you could continue doing that throughout, that would be great. We are now going to turn over to Allison Hastings, who is the Associate Director of Communications and Engagement at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, or DVRPC, which is a federally designated metropolitan planning organization. At DVRPC, Allison serves as the Commission's Public Records Officer and Title VI Compliance Manager. She directs overall communications and outreach strategies and works with staff on creating meaningful public engagement opportunities. Allison, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm sharing my screen right now.
Great.
Okay. All right, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. As was said, I'm with Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, Philadelphia's Metropolitan Planning Organization. And today I'll be touching on a couple of different things that we've been doing kind of pre-COVID, but also adapting to COVID. And as everyone has probably said and heard themselves, the pivot was pretty quick to figure out how to do virtual public involvement really, really quickly. To do it well when you are kind of with your back against the wall with like 6 days to go before your public board meeting, for instance. So the things that I'm going to focus on are our long-range transportation plan, some of the public outreach that we did, a local area study I thought that would be relevant for a lot of people on the call in Philadelphia, which is around the Ben Franklin Bridge that connects New Jersey to Pennsylvania through Philadelphia and Camden City. And then going forward, some of the things that my colleagues have been talking about how to reach more people where they are. And I forgot I wanted to set a timer for myself. So when we were thinking about transitioning to virtual public involvement so quickly, I think in under 6 days for our first, when we received the stay-at-home order and when we had to do our first board meeting completely remote, we thought a lot about accessibility and accommodations, because that's what we have to think a lot about in person, how to take the virtual realm, the online realm, and make it applicable to, or how to take what happens in a public meeting and making it applicable to the online realm. So doing a lot of different things that recreate that experience in person. And then we also did a lot around a good public meeting, a good public involvement experience has ground rules. And part of that is you need to keep it in the online world, but you also need to think about the security aspects of the online world. So what does the platform that you're using, what are the specific like security aspects that you can have to like maybe like ask a troublemaker to leave, or keep someone from maybe sending inappropriate messages or threatening messages. So things to think about around the platform's capabilities. And these are just like what I think about with in-person meetings. It's like, what can go wrong? The same applies to online. So what we learned really quickly is that there's a lot of roles that need to be assigned for a successful public meeting or webinar. And a lot of the people that I'm going to show on this slide are my colleagues and have taught and are on the communications and engagement team, or DVRPC's leadership team. And I'm pulling from a lot of the work, research, expertise that they have developed, contributed, shared with me over the last 18 months or so. So what we learned is that it's like really important to have a lead facilitator. And so this is my colleague Shoshana, and then someone who's just looking at what's going on in the chat box. And that's my colleague Elise. So we call that like a response facilitator, or the chat box person. Someone who can be there to help with technical assistance and really like do that one-on-one help. And in person, this would be someone who I would think of as like maybe pulling someone aside when they dominate the conversation and have an issue that doesn't pertain to the meeting, or helps with where's the caterer and the food didn't show up. So, and this is my colleague, Mari. And then, you know, making sure that the subject matter expert is able to present and kind of only worry about presenting. That's like the best of both worlds, right? When you get to be the subject matter expert, you get to show up and you only have to present. And that's me, by the way. And then maybe the convener. So this could be the masters of ceremonies, the face of the meeting, your client, if you're in the private sector, the chair of your board or subcommittee. That's my colleague, Patty. And I'm going to revisit these again, because we're thinking about how this works when we go hybrid. So for the long range transportation plan that we just wrapped up and finished, prior to COVID and the pandemic, we had this really great, or what I thought was a really great public outreach plan that was going to do multiple ways to like reach people where they are, invite people into meeting spaces, collect lots of public input. We were going to do it in lots of different ways, in multiple languages. Having host communities or host organizations invite us in. So again, we had to really quickly retool our public outreach plan and see how do we make it, how do we bring those same goals and those same experiences to online, to the virtual world. And so what we did, and similar to what Jameel was talking about, is we used many different platforms. But what we did was like using video like YouTube to communicate really quickly, like the importance of a long range plan, having a very sophisticated social media campaign to reach people who we wouldn't, who weren't following us and following our every post on social media, but really like using, since we weren't hosting public meetings in person anymore, using that non-labor budget and putting it towards a social media campaign to target maybe geographies, zip codes that we don't often hear from. And then what we also did was took those like road shows that we were going to do with community organizations inviting us in to reach different populations that they serve and populations that are usually hard for a regional planning organization to reach. We decided to do it all online because what we heard and saw really quickly is that a lot of community organizations switched online right away for that connection, to keep work going, also because of that so many of these platforms are smartphone friendly. So we saw that a lot of organizations were meeting online, could still like host us. And what we found is that some things that we wanted to do in person, like bring in a translator or an interpreter for hard of hearing or deaf, was actually very easy and even more cost friendly through like a Zoom platform. So this is a screenshot of a Zoom meeting that we hosted with a captioner, a live captioner. And the person was able to live transcribe what was going on for a community, for an organization that specifically works with people with disabilities. And my automatic light just went off. Okay. And then we did public meetings, like public Zoom meetings that we were thinking would be where anyone could walk in, like walk through the door. And what does that look like through the virtual platform? So this is another screenshot of one of those meetings, and kind of like the people who showed up were the people who showed up that day, just like as if it was an in-person meeting. And so we did a lot of different ways to make that as accessible as possible with like phone numbers, phone only. Again, we really liked Zoom because you don't have to have a computer, a laptop or a computer to be able to participate. The smartphone app is really convenient. And then also it's really, it runs really well on people's web browsers. So you don't necessarily have to download the software onto your computer to participate. And we got a lot of feedback. We also did surveys, an online survey that we also were prepared to have. It was translated into Spanish, and we were prepared to mail out hard copies, which we were requested and got some back when we sent them out in self-mailers. So we got 1,300 open-ended responses from 700 individuals, not all unique individuals, because some people participated in more than one way, like participated in a Zoom meeting, as well as on the survey. But it was really great to get so many open-ended responses at a time when we had to like retool our public outreach. And then also another success story around focusing more on virtual public involvement is when we released our long-range transportation plan for public comment just a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago. We did lots of different ways to get the word out. Some of the things that Jameel has talked about, some of the things I've talked about, traditional media, advertising in traditional media, doing social media posts. We also had lots of ways to make public comments. So I'm really interested in the question that popped up in the Q&A about that phone service that North Carolina DOT uses to get phone public comments, because that's something that we've looked at doing, but it's like been a person at the other end, usually me, who's getting the public comment versus like a voicemail and having it transcribed. That's really exciting to me, to be able to add that as like one of our ways to make public comments. And we received 492 public comments. Again, from probably some overlapping individuals. I would say like maybe 300 or 400 unique individuals in there. And a lot of that is because of like the network effect, right? Having advocates who work with you to test out how best to receive comments. So we could ascribe 219 just to the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia and one of their sub-organizations, the Circuit Coalition. And then similarly, another advocacy group, but we couldn't directly ascribe the number of comments that we got from them just to them, were specifically around like no roadway widening as far as all of our transportation projects are concerned. And then specifically within those, calling out a specific piece of transportation infrastructure. And for us, with a regional plan and one that has like maybe definitely hundreds of transportation projects, but maybe if 30 like visionary transportation projects in that 50-year or 25-year horizon. Having something very specific like this is really useful for being able to respond to a public comment versus more generalized public comments. I'm running out of time a little bit, so here's just an example of taking a lot of the things that I talked about before and putting it on to a local area study. And this is an example of a local area study that we are working on, using web maps as a way to collect public input. This was a team that was really interesting, that like if you could do, a lot of times with public engagement, I'm always like, man, we should have brought a sign-up form. Man, we should have had a sign-up form on the website to collect email addresses so that if people want more information, they could get it. Man, we should have put this into Chinese and Spanish instead of waiting for someone to request it. So this project team, which included members of my team, kind of like were able to do all of that best practices right from the get-go, right from the start. So we had everything translated and posted into simplified Chinese and Spanish, a web map. The project manager did a video on how to use the web map. We put a really light, easy Google form right onto the website, the project website, so we could collect email addresses and not attach it to the web map, so that that wasn't a barrier to provide input, is by putting in your email address. That can be seen as a barrier. So we had it separately, so that people who really wanted to find out what was going on were able to find out. And then we did a follow-up survey to capture demographics and evaluate engagement. Again, we didn't want to attach it to the web map necessarily, because we didn't want to make that like a barrier to participate, like to giving input. And then we also did a postcard to all the addresses in the study area. I think it was like 2,300 unique addresses. And this was a way for us to, make sure that we were reaching people when we literally could not be out in the field during quarantine. And so I always say, with public engagement, you do the stuff that you've always done plus more. And the web map got 25,000 web views, 90 original comments, and then we were able to let people like comment on comments, which I guess people like. So 70 comments on those 90 original comments. So going forward, we're thinking a lot about how to encourage more engagement from hard to reach communities, because the hard to reach communities are harder to reach when you can't physically go out into communities, when it's not best interest, it's not responsible public engagement, lots of different reasons. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about, is understanding demographics, always using ACS data, providing resources and incentives. So communicating like why the meetings are important, why do we want their feedback at time for myself. Always building contact lists. Again, those Google Forms are really great. Trying different outreach methods, like the old ones, like postcards, emails, as well as social media, advertising, and traditional media. And then this is something that I think is so interesting. Prep your team. Online meetings are easier to schedule, at least by my very busy calendar, but they're harder to make engaging and run smoothly. So sometimes it takes more people to run them. And then evaluate. And in those evaluations, you can ask not only about like the public engagement, but also the demographic question, which can be seen sometimes as like off-putting to put it at like the beginning, of an engagement activity. So there's a lot of things that VPI still does not meet. And we've heard about that from our other speakers. And then in closing, we're thinking about how we take VPI and hybrid, like in person. So what does that look like for having in person and online for the same experience, same public input, gathering session, public meeting, you name it. So what we're thinking is that we'd have an in-person lead facilitator, a response facilitator, just like before, who's online, a greeter, someone who's doing technical assistance, again, online, maybe speakers that are only appearing online and speakers who are only appearing in person. And then the chair or the convener is in person or online, giving them more flexibility to participate in meetings. We think that the hybrid is going to be here to stay, and we're looking forward to figuring out how it works, but it probably will take more people. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Andrea and Trish.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. And now I'm going to move quickly on to our final set of speakers who join us from the New Jersey Department of Transportation. We have Vanessa Holman and Megan Fackler. Vanessa is the Deputy Chief of Staff and works closely with the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner and Chief of Staff while overseeing the Office of Government and Community Relations and Communications Office. And Megan is the Director of Government and Community Relations at NJDOT. So Megan and Vanessa, take it away.
Thank you, Trish. Oh, we got to share our screen.
Keeping it real.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think you shared.
Am I not sharing?
Go ahead. Hit PowerPoint.
Things are going well.
There you go. Share.
There we go.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introductions, Trish. It's definitely been a very informative last hour or so, and we look forward to bringing our flair from the New Jersey Department of Transportation. So with that, I'll get started. Now we're, as I just indicated, going to begin the more formal part of our presentation today about how the department pivoted our engagement and communications with the public. I will share some quick insights we gained as a department while adjusting to some pandemic communication challenges. Our Office of Government and Community Relations had to really think on our feet when COVID-19 shut everything down. As we all know, it began in the middle of March 2020 when we were told to cancel upcoming public meetings, but were challenged to continue to ensure NJDOT projects were moving forward with NEPA Title VI compliance. When the pandemic hit, we couldn't stop or slow down our project rollout process. Local officials briefings, otherwise known as LOBs, and public information centers, or PICs, are integral parts of that process, ensuring our customers and elected officials are looped in at every stage of the game and have the opportunity to provide feedback and ask questions. Pre-pandemic, unless it was major, noteworthy, or a hot topic project, our average PIC attendance for in-person meetings, usually held after hours on weeknights and in public spaces such as school gyms, municipal buildings, would be approximately 15 to 30 people on a good night. I've personally been at PICs where we saw about 6 constituents over the course of 3 hours. During the pandemic, however, the virtual PICs actually increased attendance. They were extended over a 2-week period online instead of a 3-hour time slot on a given night. More people were able to access the site, submit feedback and questions, and we were more easily able to track and respond to that feedback. Thank you. It certainly wasn't all rainbows and butterflies when we were figuring out how to proceed in a virtual environment, in addition to staying compliant and successfully reaching all of New Jersey's socioeconomically diverse constituent base. But with some bobbing and weaving, we were able to find a system that worked. The digital divide is real, especially from economic, rural, and generational perspectives, including tech savviness, as I'm sure we've all encountered. Those were hurdles that we had to find a way to overcome in order to make sure the virtual PICs were accessible to all. We found success by marrying some of our old ways of engagement, such as mailing flyers to constituent homes, handwritten comment cards at PICs, etc., with the new virtual ones. Additionally, collaborating with stakeholders through the use of their social media websites, municipal and county websites, and digital news sources help to spread the word to the public impacted by our upcoming projects. Furthermore, features like Google Translate and other tools help to further reach all of our customers equally. Sometimes the methods to our madness paid off. For example, one of our VPI success stories is regarding our Route 80, Route 15 exchange PIC. We felt it was a hit. Originally scheduled as an in-person PIC in March of 2020, we quickly adapted to the virtual platform. It wasn't easy, and as we all know and have seen firsthand, we all know technology has a way of glitching when we are depending it on the most. However, we took a leap of faith, trusted technology, and through our 2-week-long website approach with online commenting, felt that success. With the help of our partners and of the affected municipalities and counties to spread the word through their website and social media platforms, our engagement results were truly unprecedented for our department. As a result, while the in-person PIC for this project held a few years earlier in the concept development phase totaled approximately 30 people in attendance, the virtual PIC held during the preliminary engineering phase had a record engagement of approximately 2,200 members of the public who submitted almost 100 insightful comments. As noted before, the in-person PIC had previously occurred during the nighttime hours, and as you can see on your screen now through all the various graphs, to accommodate the average 9 to 5 work days, again, it was held from about 5 to 8 p.m. The metrics showed that our virtual PIC survey responses were highest between 9 and 11 a.m. and between 8 and 10 p.m. Additionally, our tracking showed continuous traffic throughout the 2-week period, topping off with days of 500 and 600 individuals engaged respectively. This virtual approach removes some of the barriers to attendance, for example, transportation to the in-person PIC meetings, conflicting work schedules, or lack of childcare that kept some members of the public from being able to participate in the limited 3-hour time frame previously. Again, I just want to really focus on the screen for a moment. Taking that turn to virtual, not only can you see the number of responses spread between approximately July 14th and July 28th and 29th, the time of day that the survey responses were engaged, as I indicated, between 8 and 10 a.m. And in the later evening hours. And then as well as you could see that we peaked and valleyed throughout the whole 2-week process, really showing that kind of adapting and ensuring we could engage all individuals depending on their schedule and availability, really helped our public engagement process. And with that, I'm going to flip it to Vanessa to continue.
And before I go to my next slide, when I first saw these metrics that Megan's team had put together, I kind of thought it was funny. I understood the nighttime engagement for the virtual public involvement, but I was not so sure why like 9 and 11 a.m. was like another peak time for people to be engaging with us online. And then I just thought about how people are working from home, or even people who had started to come back into the office at that point, or were not sure where they were, but that's like your settling in time of the day. So that's when people are like having their coffee or like not fully engaged in their workday yet, and they have the time to like check it out. Otherwise, they're waiting till their workday is over. They're waiting till the kids are put to bed, and then it's late at night. So it was just interesting insight for us. And it might change if and when we go back to hybrid or in-person public information centers. It might change the times that we choose to host these things. So moving on, not only did our external communication about our projects have to pivot, we also had to change the way we talked internally and with our partner agencies. When everything shut down in the end of March of 2020, we had to learn new technology very quickly and get laptops and cell phones into the hands of our newly remote workers within a couple of weeks. A lot of people in our shops, because they are so remote and have been working all over the state pre-pandemic, we're used to having a 2-in-1 laptop and or a work cell phone, but there was plenty of people in the department who never worked remotely at all and didn't even know how to log into our VPN system. And so our IT department had to work very quickly to get that moving, as I'm sure most of you also had to deal with. So we started off using WebEx. Then we moved to the GoToMeeting platform, and we finally settled comfortably with Microsoft Teams. I've noticed that oftentimes when we have external requests for a meeting, when other agencies or legislators set up a meeting, they tend to lean towards Zoom. So we have been becoming more proficient in Zoom. And no offense to Rutgers, but I barely remembered how to use WebEx because it had been so long since we had used it in the beginning. So I'm glad we did a tech check late last week because it took me like 10 minutes to log in, but now I feel like I remember what I'm doing here. We also increased our utilization of previously available tools such as Google Maps to discuss jurisdictional issues in meetings. Our staff had to get comfortable learning how to share their screens when they were talking to municipal engineers or to the public explaining what was going on. We had to learn chat functions in order to efficiently continue to communicate and get the job done. As Megan said, obviously we make the big bucks over here, and it's because we had the bob and weave, and we had to take our preparation really seriously when getting ready to present these virtual meetings. So I think that during COVID, like many people who fluctuated between working from home or TAWL or whatever you guys call it, most of us started working longer hours than we did before. So I think we put in a lot of time doing our daily work, and then on top of that, learning how to prep for the new daily work that was going to be virtual. We were very diligent in scripting in advance to get everybody and everything buttoned up and on the same page before we reach out virtually to the public, whether it was engaging our customers or our elected officials, because we could no longer sit around a table and kind of just figure things out. The way we do our construction projects, the way we handle our right-of-way issues. A lot of times we used to sit in this conference room with this huge long map set out across the table, and it was easy for everybody to kind of stand around and point and ask questions, and we can no longer do that. And because of that, we lost a lot of the body language that helps convey tone in a conversation, or even signal like who's supposed to be talking next in a meeting when you have multiple SMEs in a room and you're trying to put together a presentation. We also started creating 1 to 2 page brief but thorough memos to let elected officials know of project updates and any potential issues before they hear about it from the press or a disgruntled constituent. For example, in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida, we had a few significant projects that needed to be addressed even after the flooding subsided and our like typical debris cleanup maintenance issues were cleared up. We made it a point to reach out to the affected legislative districts with memos explaining the outstanding and ongoing repairs before they came to us so that they could be prepared to respond to their constituents in the event that they were contacted. We made sure to keep the memos brief and in layman's terms in order to update them as our work progressed. We got very positive feedback on these memos. Literally the other day, our commissioner came in and thanked Megan personally for putting them together because she's like, our memos are, because a few legislators have just been like raving about them, saying how helpful it is. And this is not to pat us on the back. I mean, a little bit it is, but it's to go to show like, these things are one pagers. These are things that we have in our heads, and probably you guys as subject matter experts in your field have in your heads, and you know what you're trying to say, but elected officials don't know the nitty gritty of what we're doing here at DOT. So putting together a one pager of stuff we already know and then reading it back as if we were a completely ignorant constituent who is not dumb, but just ignorant of our practices and our lingo, it made it so much easier for the legislators to then turn around. So, we got very positive feedback. Like I said, the legislators were thrilled to have something plain spoken at their fingertips to share with their constituency that didn't get into the weeds and didn't need a course in engineering to understand the verbiage. As you may have noticed, with the extra time that people had working from home, social media and other online engagement increased. And DOT began to see a significant influx in social media messages to our department accounts, more incoming emails from the public, more @mentions on Twitter, the good, the bad, and the ugly. NJDOT is one of the departments, as I mentioned, that cannot fully work from home during the pandemic as we had to roll out our $1 billion plus construction program, and you can't do construction from your couch in the living room. Our commissioner continued to lead by example, communicate with the public virtually and safely in person at press events, and so our presence in the news and on social media remained a constant. Luckily, some people noticed, and as you can see, some people had positive feedback, which is great. Here at the department, we believe that social media is a form of VPI, and that being said, our social media managers stay very busy. We also post upcoming PIC information on our social media platform, so we use that as an additional venue or method to get the word out to constituents about our upcoming more formal VPI. So these are all good, what we call happy tweets, happy screenshots. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I want to say thanks to Marge, who is a pure comedian. She thinks that DOT is her mortal enemy. As much as we try and foster good relationships with our customers, we will never win everybody over, and that's okay. Our goal is not for everybody to love DOT. Although that would be great, it's not going to happen. Our goal is to keep everyone informed and stay as open and transparent as possible with good news and less good news. This particular individual wasn't very happy with the noise that some traffic news helicopters were making at a crash site on our highway. I thought this was a good one because the customer took extra time to map out the location of the helicopters. It looked like he used Microsoft Paint, or I'm not really sure what he did, but this individual was very thorough and he wanted to make sure that we knew exactly where these helicopters were so that there was no mistake, as if we could, as a department, yank them out of the sky for him. And finally, this is one of my personal favorites, the old, I tripped on a signpost and I need a new pair of shoes routine. When it comes to crisis communication, we feel like sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes over communication is better. We would prefer to be known for our proactiveness rather than simply reacting to different emergencies and situations. With all that said, sometimes things just simply don't go as planned. Last March, we had a retaining wall collapse on one of our big, important projects. The wall wasn't open to the public yet, and thankfully no one was injured. It became our responsibility as a voice of DOT in both Megan's shop as Director of Government and Community Relations and the other shop that I manage, which is our communication shop, to communicate with our customers what happened to the extent that we knew and what was going to happen. However, despite our best efforts, there's simply no way to prevent videos like this. I'm going to play this video assuming it works. It's only a minute. I would say trigger warning, but here you go.
Breaking into the Belmar, New Jersey, watch this video until the end. A portion of the 42-295 Direct Connect $1 billion project in Belmar is collapsing. As you can see, the retaining wall is bulging and the roadway has already collapsed. Now this is where it gets spooky. During the building of this roadway, DOT took parts of the St. Mary Cemetery to build the direct connect, the exact portion that is now collapsing. This house, the Hug Harrison house, sat here on that land, built in 1764. There was a group trying to save it, and it was demolished by DOT overnight in 2017. It was a disgusting move by DOT. This is what the house looked like before the roadway was constructed. And this is that exact same spot today, collapsing. So is this roadway already cursed by that one event? Stealing land from the cemetery and using eminent domain to tear down that building to build this billion-dollar project? Is this road already cursed and haunted? Seems like something's going on. Or is it just a coincidence? You decide.
So that was real spooky. Within hours of this collapse, Megan's team, along with our communication shop, worked with our front office to develop a crisis communication strategy. We had regular Zoom calls with legislators and local officials to keep them apprised. We issued 7-day notices on old lane closures and accompanying traffic advisories. We already knew that people were going to be upset. They didn't understand what happened or why it happened, and frankly, at the time, neither did we. So we needed to give them as much information that we could. And that included making sure that they knew when a lane was going to be closed, because when that collapsed, we had to send our contractor out, and they were literally like trucking truckloads and truckloads and truckloads of sand, dirt, debris, whatever material it was off site. So for the first few days, there was a lot of activity going on in the site. We decided to create a text for info sign up where you could text a phone number and get regular updates on the project. We didn't want to inundate people, so I think we averaged about 1 update a week unless there was something urgent or like a last minute emergency that came up. I will say that while I think that we put together a really comprehensive and thoughtful, far-reaching crisis communication strategy, some things like this text for info just didn't take off. We had billboards, we had VMS boards, we had social media, paid advertising, we had geofencing, reaching people within a 15-mile radius of the project zone. We had radio ads, we had paid advertorials. And to this day, these efforts started in May when we started the text for info. We only have like less than 250 people signed up for texts, even though we've reached tens and thousands of people through all of these methods. So in the beginning it was a little bit frustrating when we were checking our weekly numbers and seeing that like people were not signing up for these text messages, because we thought like, hey, don't they want to know what's going on here? But I don't think we're taking that as a failure. It's just more like a lesson learned. We're going to continue to maintain that text for info for those 200 and some people who want to be included. And then we're just gonna take this into consideration for next time. Do these people not care because a lot of this section of roadway is shore traffic, so people don't really need text updates when they're really just driving down from Philly to the shore once or twice a summer? The people in the area might not want regular text updates because they're getting the emails and the information from their local officials that we're feeding them. We can't really figure out exactly why only 250 people want to sign up for text here, because we've used text updates before in other projects and they were much more engaging. So it was just an interesting feedback. I don't know that we would use this method in the future, depending on the situation, but it was a good opportunity for us to learn what worked and what didn't work.
Breaking news of the Belmar, New Jersey. Watch this.
I don't know how to go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. So thank you for your time. We hope we said a few things that were helpful for you. And now we'd like to give the floor back to Andrea and Trish. We think that many times sharing what went wrong is more impactful than sharing all of our success stories and patting ourselves off the back. If we can really take the veil off and just talk in real talk about some of the messier stuff that we have to deal with, it could really benefit everybody, learning from other people's mistakes and learning what worked and what didn't work for you. So thank you so much, Trish, for your time. And we were really happy to be here and have this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa and Megan. That was very informative, and you're definitely keeping it real. As I think all of our presenters mentioned, there are some pros and there's always going to be some cons and some challenges with Vpi. So thank you so much. I know we're kind of like at our point of the end of this webinar, but I'm glad we got through all our presenters. And so if you want to stick around, great. We'll go through our Q&A and ask our questions to our panelists. If you want to leave, that's fine too. Hopefully you'll stick around. But we did get some great questions into Q&A, so we'll go through those. And, you know, here's the beauty of VPI is that I couldn't actually see the questions, even though I'm a panelist. So Omid had to put them into chat for me. So I'm going to go through some, and Andrea, of course, you know, you'll help me out here too.
Of course.
So the first one that I'm seeing is for Jameel, and this person is wondering, in your experience, how expensive is Nextdoor? They've heard from other agencies that it is cost prohibitive in dense urban areas. So do you have some thoughts about Nextdoor?
I would have to get with our social media coordinator. I should know that, but
Okay.
I'd have to get back and follow back up with you on that. But I don't believe there's a huge cost there. I really don't.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of getting into those different Nextdoor chats and
yeah, they have a when we first started looking at it, they didn't have a government platform or
Like a package or something.
a package, and so then they developed that, and so yeah, I don't think it's a huge cost there at all.
Yeah. Okay.
Trish, while we have Jameel on camera, Jameel, one other, I think is a quick question that came in was, what programs do you use in North Carolina DOT to make those 3D visualizations that you shared with us in your presentation?
So I should have my visualization team lead on, but we use 3D Studio Max for a lot of it. He's a technical expert. I just try to funnel all the work to him. But yeah, it's 3D Studio Max is one of the main tools we use for that.
Great.
We're trying to transfer over to waiting to see how ORD comes along for the department, because that should speed up our visualization efforts.
Great, thanks, Jameel. Let's see, another comment or question we have was, and this is really, I think, for any of our panelists, most VPI is great for sharing information with many people or getting simple input, but what about the two-way communication, the discussion that you get, for example, at an in-person open house? Are there any virtual tools that are successful for this level of collaboration that you get in an open house or in-person workshop? So just sort of ways or strategies or tools that any of you have used to really facilitate that two-way communication would be great to hear. Allison, you want to jump in? Yeah, go for it.
So like, again, the platform helps. So Zoom, we use Zoom. The chat box, at first, some of us were like overwhelmed with the activity going into the chat box, but then you can save it. And so it became like an amazing source of public input, right? Like all of these individuals who made comments. So the chat box became like a huge source of primary data and public input that we could use. And then when it's important to have like conversations, again, the platform was a big part of that. So Zoom with breakout rooms, having small groups of like 4, 6, 7, 8 people in a breakout room, just like they would be in person. And then having that conversation and having a staff facilitator, using Google Form or Google Docs as a way and sharing your screen so that you can basically model what you would do with a flip chart. So we just thought as much as possible about like what worked in person and what was the point of it, and was it applicable to online, and then use those same ways as transparently as possible or in new ways to capture that input. And yeah, the platforms are all the time like pushing updates out that enable like these breakout rooms for small group discussion, sharing screens, taking notes, because they are really trying to emulate what we do in person.
Great, thanks, Allison. Trish, do you have another question on there?
Unless somebody else, any of the other panelists want to chime in about collaboration in open houses? I would agree with you, Allison, based on our experiences that we've been really successful with breakout groups because it allows people to speak openly and freely.
Yeah, especially if they're intimidated by larger groups.
Right. The other question I see is, what are the typical costs for publicinput.com? Thoughts on that? Don't use public.
I would reach out to Graham Stone or Public Input to get some cost on that. I can't speak to that. We have a subscription,
Okay.
which is cost effective for us, so we can use it on all of our projects, and we do the same with MetroQuest. So
that's good to know. A question for Megan and Vanessa. Thank you for sharing some of the memorable social media feedback that you've received from residents and stakeholders. Have you received feedback, either positive or negative, from community members specifically about your VPI practices or the platforms you used? And if you have received that type of feedback, has that encouraged you to make any changes to your VPI strategies at DOT?
I'd say for the most part, and I apologize, Vanessa had to cut out at 1:35. Not really thus far. We have received, not through social media tactics, but definitely as comments within our picks or emails after the fact, just some questions regarding the platform we chose to use. Additionally, again, I think I touched upon marrying the old and the new when it comes to virtual public outreach. And one of the things we do when we feel it's very important to have is to have in advance of that engagement meeting, a phone number or an email that they can reach out in advance if there's going to be any need for technical assistance, or perhaps they can't participate due to whatever socioeconomic reason, and that we definitely tailor those requests very specifically to those candidates. So again, I don't think it was harped upon in the presentation, but it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all practice. I think we really, I mean, some of us here are from New Jersey. We understand how different it is from north to south to cities to suburban. And we really do our best kind of using that 2-week pick theme to ensure that we're engaging all of those who would like to be involved in any way we possibly can, even if it means going above and beyond in those circumstances.
Great. Thank you, Megan. We have a question here for Ricky. VPI is effective. However, if municipalities request in-person public meetings, will FHWA be providing guidelines for conducting in-person public meetings during the pandemic, or doing a hybrid?
Yes, that's a great question. So really that kind of really depends on, you know, really the guidance that the state or local municipality might issue. Certainly we're still in the midst of the ongoing pandemic. And so what Federal Highways has done is just said, hey, you know, during this pandemic, we can have temporary VPI, but we also mentioned that kind of depends on what the situation is at each municipality, what local public health officials are also indicating, as well as the condition specific to that area. And so at this time, you know, the virtual public involvement guidance is the guidance. At a time when the pandemic ends, then, you know, the guidance will be changed or be modified. But really, we would look to kind of what are the conditions, real world conditions that are happening in each municipality, and then certainly with each state, what they feel comfortable with in terms of allowing in-person engagement.
Great.
Maybe a potential final question to direct it to all our panelists. If you could offer, you know, one piece of advice to a peer agency who's seeking to increase their involvement among underserved populations in their VPI efforts, you know, what would that be? You know, just a starting place for them, or, you know, something, a strategy or a tool that you've used that you feel like has really helped you kind of get to folks who are underserved or vulnerable. Any thoughts? You know, something Jameel had mentioned that stuck with me was the power of radio advertising, which is something that at the start of the pandemic I didn't think about. But when Jameel explained, you know, the number of folks who are monthly radio listeners, I think it was from the Vpi Foundation, that was, you know, just really hit home. And you kind of target certain times a day to get to folks and advertise, you know, your outreach. I thought that was, you know, a great tip.
Yeah, so from the federal perspective, and just this is more of a general, broad, all-encompassing type comment. And so just hearing from the other presenters at the state DOT level, the MPO level, one thing that stands out when you're applying and utilizing the VPI innovation is the importance of having kind of a public involvement plan to begin with. And I think each one of the speakers kind of mentioned, that importance of having that plan and then utilizing the VPI tools. And so I think, Allison or someone had mentioned, also evaluating the effectiveness of, how VPI tools are utilized is really something important. And, at some point, the COVID-19 pandemic emergency will end. There have been a lot of advances, and so at some point, things will get better. But, in moving forward, the kind of big takeaway I've gotten from the session is just see how the DOTs have been able to be nimble and to be able to, modify their approach. Historically, I know a lot of the MPOs have been able to be perhaps more nimble, but just seeing the DOTs themselves become more nimble in applying and using the VPI innovations. And so just imagine a time after COVID when we can continue to advance the VPI innovation in combination with that in-person experience. It's going to be a win-win, not only for the public to engage us, but then also for all of us as transportation decision makers in engaging the public. So I'm really excited, and I know the title of the session is VPI during COVID and beyond. And so one of my key takeaways is being excited about the beyond, like what happens after the COVID emergency is ended. And so just a couple general thoughts and just hearing the other speakers today.
It was the question, if the most effective way to engage underserved population?
Or just any, any kind of strategy or tool or tip that you feel like is a good starting place even to sort of broadening your outreach.
So, my community studies team, they do all the demographics, the community impact assessments, the community characteristics reports. So before we plan any outreach, we look at the demographics. So what's there? And when we see EJ or LEP communities, the first thing we do is try to reach out to the local planning office or local planner or, someone that's familiar with the area to try to identify a LARC, like I mentioned earlier, because that is the most effective way to get into those communities.
It's really helpful. Trish, do you see any other questions?
I do see one last question that came in for all the presenters. And it'd be interesting to know how they are handling data protection.
Ooh, boy.
Is that another webinar, Jameel?
I'll tell you,
On that topic alone?
No, it should
First, for public engagement, don't ask it if you cannot protect the information. So that's really, really important. Don't ask about medical stuff if you can't protect the information, and most of us cannot. So
yeah, my battles with IT we're in a good place now, but it could be a reality show. It could have been. We just really simplify what we ask. So when it comes to demographics, because when you put a name with an email with an address,
right,
you kind of cross that threshold, and so there is a threshold there. We actually, public input is because that's one of our main tools. They're actually going through the SOC 2 certification. That's going to be better for all states, and as more state ITs become a little more rigid on this topic. But yeah, we really simplify what we ask in combination. But I always say, really do we really have privacy? If you have a smartphone, you're connected. I think privacy might be a fantasy these days. But and then Russia's not hacking public input sites or our data, you know, because it's public record, most of the stuff. So, and then people at a normal public meeting, we ask all that information and people sign in, and then it's public record if we get a FOIA request. So I don't know, there's some nuances there, but I think we just really simplify what we ask in combination.
Another thing is to like put sunset dates on like how long a survey is open and then follow that sunset date. If you want to contact people for a certain amount of time or a certain project, then have a date when you are going to expunge those contacts if that was part of like how you gathered that information. So it's part of and like focus groups would be a good example of that. Focus groups where like you need the contact information and their zip code and their demographics, and they're not anonymous people. You're trying to get them to serve on a focus group, so you need all of these identifiers. Then have by June 30th, we will expunge this record, and then expunge the record and get, so that you're not, they're giving you the information, knowing how it will be used and how long it will be used, and then follow through with not using it after that.
Right. Thank you so much. I think we're out of time, but
Okay.
you're going to close.
Sure, I'll close this out. Thank you all so much. We want to first thank the NJDOT Bureau of Research for hosting the session today, and of course to our panelists for their engaging presentations that communicated a wealth of knowledge and their experiences with VPI, both before, during this pandemic. We also want to thank all of you, the attendees, for your interest and for your thoughtful questions, and we hope that you all continue to remain healthy and safe. And we request that you please fill out and submit the feedback survey for today's event, which should be available to complete after the webinar is closed in a moment. So thank you all, and stay well.
Thank you so much.